everyone, and welcome to Creative Accessibility Across Canada. Today, we have Through My Lens with Amy Amantea. Before we get started, I just want to quickly do a land acknowledgement and remind folks that AANM and Creative Manitoba is located on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Dene people, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. We note that Treaty 3 is where Winnipeg receives its water supply and that most of our electricity comes from Treaty 5. We aim to move forward in solidarity with Indigenous people to address the continued harm of perpetual colonialism. Disability justice must take into account experiences of ableism that intersect racism, sexism, ageism, sizeism, queer and transphobia, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. We learn from systems of oppression and movements of resistance and how they implicate us. We believe all people have a right to participate, inform, and lead arts and culture. As I mentioned, today we have Amy Amantea. Just a quick little bio about Amy. Amy identifies as a white settler, an uninvited guest on the stolen lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and oh boy, that's a tough one.
Tsleil-Waututh.
Tsleil-Waututh, first people. Thank you so much. Colonially known as Vancouver, BC. Amy is an artist with lived experience of blindness, specifically having 2% of vision in one eye. She is also a photographer with a practice that involves walking the city at twilight, looking at interesting light patterns and capturing them with her camera. Amy, I will pass it over to you. And hello, Laura.
Hello.
Thanks, Janelle. I appreciate that. Thanks, friends, for having me. I really appreciate being able to share some of this project that I am working on or have worked on and continue to work on called Through My Lens. Kind of a bit of a double entendre, as Through My Lens is both a camera phrasing and also through my eyes, through my lens kind of experiential thing, as I am legally blind with 2% vision. So I created this sort of little PowerPoint presentation. It's really slides that are going to keep me on track because I'm also an ADHDer and I can go on tangents like nobody's business. So here we go, friends. This is Through My Lens by Amy Amantea with James Long, who is my co-director and co-writer, and with Theatre Replacement, who's the theatre company that has backed this. And I'll tell you how this relates to accessibility as we go through this, because I know this is all about creative access, and that is largely my practice outside of being an artist, but you can't separate those two things from me, which is a conversation that James and I have had since we started this project. So I will ask Janelle to put us onto the next slide, please. Janelle, when you're ready.
Go. Sorry about that. I had my
That's okay.
Good to go.
Great, awesome. I also reminding myself that I have notes here, so I'm not actually aware of what you're doing on your end.
So we're looking at the slide with all the cameras, and there's a white box that said, first there was an officer from Rick Holbert.
Great.
Oh, offer, not officer.
Offer. Yeah, that's great. So first there came this offer from a guy named Rick Holbert. I happened to be in my local mall buying my first iPhone, so you can imagine how long ago this was, a good 10, 12 years ago. And his wife, Tina Holbert, was somebody I did not know, came across me as I was playing with the voiceover on my iPhone, and I could not figure it out. And she saw my white cane, and she said that her name is Tina, and she is a retired teacher of the deaf, and that her husband, Rick, is a photography teacher, a professor rather, at a very prestigious university here in Vancouver, and is the kind of photographer who's been on like National Geographic tours and expeditions. And like, we're not just talking about somebody who teaches photography on the weekend. We're talking about very respected, very well-known photographer that like is a wizard kind of person. And so I was really curious about this person. And she thought that we should that we should meet. Turns out that he also lived in the same neighborhood. The two of them lived in the same neighborhood that I did, which was even more exciting. So Rick and I met, and Rick gave me my first ever camera, my first ever like real camera, which kind of looked like one of these ones on the screen. It was kind of like an old fashioned feeling heavier camera, not one of those fancy XLR or fancy cameras with the fancy high powered zoom lenses or whatever, but a really, like 1980s feeling kind of camera. But the weight of that camera was really nice. It felt sturdy. It felt like you could drop it and it wouldn't break. There was something nice and tactile about that camera that really drew me in as a person who couldn't really see it. Couldn't see the viewfinder, couldn't put my eyeball through the little hole to see anything. But the weight of it felt really comfortable for me, and that was part of the appeal. So on the next slide, Janelle, it says, so our conversation was, Rick was wondering, how might somebody with blindness or low vision see the world through photographs or photography? And so I have a couple of images here which are a little bit blurry. So colors that are blurry, shades that are blurry, people that are blurry, and sort of cityscapes that are blurry. But that was kind of his question was, can photography enhance the world? Does it change the world we look in? What would these photographs turn out to be? And of course, I think you would maybe recognize that with digital photography, I point and click and the camera takes the photo. It's not my eyes taking the photo. What my eyes see is different than what the camera sees, which is kind of part of the interesting piece of this. So if my eyes were clicking and taking a photograph, that would be a whole different experience. But that is not obviously what's happening. So Rick would set up the camera for me because I can't read any of the dials and I'm not a photographer, go figure. So I don't know the difference between, setting different ratios and different ways that the lens shutter reacts, different speed shutters and all of those things. I don't know what photographers know. I just know that Rick sets all the dials and I go out and point and shoot. And that was going to be part of my first challenge. So on the next slide is what I'm calling my practice, which is finding the light. And so in my first attempts at going out, I went with Rick at first because I wasn't really secure with going out by myself and taking photographs. And I took probably 100 photographs. And you have to imagine that I thought that was a lot of photographs. And apparently it's not. Photographers take thousands of photographs, but these are digital photos, right? So you can take as many as you want to. And I'm not looking at them on a computer afterwards. I'm not choosing. I have no ability to be able to say that's a good photo, that's not a good photo, because I don't know what makes a good photo, and I don't have the proper eyesight to be able to say, oh, that's lovely, look at that. So I would take the camera back to Rick's house. We would sit at his kitchen table. He would pull them up on a screen. He would try and explain to me what made them good and what didn't. And out of those first 100 photos, he'd say, you've got 4 really good shots. And my heart would go, oh, really? 4? And he'd be like, do you have any idea how many photos a photographer has to take to get 4 really good shots? So what I thought was like disappointing to get 4 shots turned out to be amazing to get 4 shots. So it was a certain learning curve for me. And what we discovered was that most photographers, and if anybody in the room is a photographer, this may resonate with you, it may not, depends on what your practice is. But a lot of photographers are bogged down or thinking a lot about the subject or the objects within the photo, right? What your camera's focused on, whether it's people or what it is you're taking the picture of, or what's in the background of what you're taking the picture of. So perhaps, you want to be focused on, I don't know, whatever it is. Say it's 2 people having a conversation and all of a sudden a bike whizzes back in the background and you're like, well, that picture's no good, there's a bike in the background. Or it's a beautiful tree and, well, it's no good because there's a fence in the background. And because I'm focused on finding the light, I don't know what the objects are, what the subjects are in the photo. So I literally just wander the streets of Vancouver looking for interesting patches of light. And I do this during golden hour, which is usually sunrise or sunset. So depending on the time of year, it could be like super, super early in the morning or really late at night, or, that varies. And I take photos of patches of light, and what's there is there. And that's it. So the photo on this slide, on the left-hand slide, is one of the first photos I took out of that 100 pack of photos. And so it's been explained to me that it's a photo of an alleyway. I remember exactly which alleyway this is, on the corner of Georgia Street. It's right next to the Vancouver Hotel. Sorry, it's the Georgia Street Hotel. And I was walking past and I saw this splash of light that caught my peripheral, and I turned and I clicked my camera and I kept walking. And this light apparently is bouncing off of some kind of tower in the background that is got, mirrored buildings, and into the shadow, into the alleyway, and sort of off of metal grates and metal staircases. And apparently there's a really cool play of light and shadow, which is really, when you're finding the light, is what you're kind of looking for, is how the light plays with shadow and texture. And that's really what my practice is about, is how the light is playing with shadow and texture. Doesn't matter what's in the picture, it's the shadow and the light and the texture, and anything can be the subject or the object. So it's kind of an interesting practice. Now, of course, the risk to me is, I don't know what's in that alley. Could there have been a bike coming my way? Maybe. Could there have been, I don't know, something dangerous? I don't know, two dogs in a garbage can that could have turned and run towards me? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's part of the risk, because I can't see what's down the alleyway, right? It's also part of the adrenaline rush. And the other thing about this is that I kind of wonder what people are thinking when they're looking at me taking photos, because I'm navigating with my white cane. So it must be quite an experience for people to be looking at me thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. She has a white cane and she's taking photographs. So my internal dialogue kind of, I feel like I can hear people scratching their head or kind of chuckling, or, going, is she faking this blindness thing? Or is this a trick? Or like, where does the camera come on that says you're on candid camera? That kind of stuff. But this is part of the fun of the practice. So the next slide is called Through My Lens, the Experience. So here's how the story begins. I'm in a workshop one day before the pandemic. I was invited to a workshop by Theatre Replacement. They had 2 spots for subsidized spots, and they wanted people with disabilities to come to this 2-week intensive workshop, in-person workshop, before COVID, obviously. And I jumped at the chance to do this. I was an emerging artist and didn't have a lot of connection with the community, didn't have any professional theater or arts projects under my belt, I'm not going to say relatively new to blindness, but new to what blindness and art looked like for me. And so I was really trying to figure out what my practice would be, what I would do, and really wanted to get back into theater and acting. And this intensive was about movement, and very theatrical, but mostly movement. And as we were sitting around in this group of people, everybody was introducing themselves and talking about projects that they were doing. And of course, I'm sitting there saying to myself, I don't have a project. And thinking that, I must be like, I don't belong here with these people, because everybody's doing really cool things. And I'm like the imposter in the room. I don't belong with these other artists. I'm not an artist. So I shared with them what I just shared with you about my photography practice, this thing that I've been trying, that I've been playing with. Maybe it'll go somewhere, maybe it won't, but I kind of have this idea of what it might be like to have people describe to me the photographs that I've taken, but I've never really seen. Because that's what Rick had been doing for me. He'd been describing to me the photographs that I'd taken that I'd never really seen, and how that could be done in an artistic way. And anyway, so my turn had passed, and we left it at that, and we continued on with our two-week workshop. Then the pandemic hits, and we gather again with a different group of people, but the same workshop. They called this the New Aesthetics workshop. So it was the same workshop, but with a different group of people and a different theme. And again, we're in this circle and everybody's talking about what they're doing. And again, I'm sharing the same thing now with a different group of people, also thinking I'm an imposter. I don't belong here. Everybody's doing really creative things. And these people were so interested in how this could be done, they couldn't stop talking about it. And James Long was in the room that day from Theatre Replacement, who offers these workshops. And after that workshop, he said to me, "How can we make this happen?" And I said, "I don't know." I had no idea how the funding worked with Canada Council of the Arts or BC Arts Council. So James and Theatre Replacement applied for some funding, and I applied for some funding personally through James, because as a blind person, I don't know if anybody here has ever applied for arts funding, but the portals are totally not accessible. The whole process is not accessible. If you're a screen reader user, forget it. If you're dyslexic like I am, forget it. ADHD, forget it. Like, there's a lot of barriers trying to apply for arts funding. And some people in this space will get that. Even I think if you're an able-bodied person, just the process of it is daunting to begin with. So add in the intersections and the barriers of disability, and you're kind of like, oh, you have money for disabled people to make art, and you make it that difficult for us to get the money? Oh, okay. I see where this is going. So at any rate, we applied for some funding and we got full funding, which was over $100,000 in funding. And we were like, well, what can we do with this funding? And it was pandemic. So we divided this funding up, and we first did an iteration of this online. So this is where the first bit of accessibility comes in, because accessibility for me obviously needs to be as part of the project, but it starts with the artist. I'm a disabled artist. So I can't go into any process of creating anything without it being accessible for me to be in a space where I'm creating. So that involves the people that I work with understanding what my barriers are, what my access needs are, how to support my access needs in the space, but also whatever their access needs are, whether they live with disability or not, because an inclusive space includes everybody. So our rehearsal periods were 4 hours a day, maybe 5 if we wanted to stretch to 5. Our philosophy was that we needed a good life balance for our, workshops, which were 1 week or 2 weeks at a time, and then we would rest for, a handful of months and then go back to it. That we would do an iterative process, which was really like a storytelling process where James would ask me a bunch of questions sort of about my life, and I would tell him stuff, and we would create transcripts, and we basically would pull out the dialogue from the transcripts to create a narrative for this project, because this is my story essentially. So what better way to do this? And that knowing that this work is so personal to me meant that it was also personal to the other folks in the space. We were all behind this work. And after about 4 or 5 hours, your brain starts to get foggy anyways. And there's no point in working for another 4 or 5 hours because you aren't doing your best work in the space. And then you start to, I don't know, not be so engaged with the project, maybe even hate the project. It's too much work, it's too overwhelming. And it's nice to be able to go home and say, you know what, I got time for laundry, or I can, make my kids dinner, or whatever it is you need to do in your personal life, because you have some time to do that. So we really created space for that. Because we were going to do an online performance during the pandemic, we set up exactly the technology that I needed in order to thrive in that space, to read lines the way that I needed to read them. All of that stuff was set up perfectly for me, which was part of the joy and why I didn't get so tired with this. So I'm not going to share with you what we did online because it's pretty much the same dialogue for all of the iterations of this, tweaked a little bit as we go. But after we did the online version of it, we got some more funding to travel with it. So we did a version in Kingston, Ontario. We did a version here in Vancouver, where I'm based, and we did a version in Ottawa. So it was the Folda Festival of Live Digital Art in Kingston, and Undercurrents in Ottawa, and the Hold On Let Go Festival here in Vancouver, all within about a year and a half's time as our team. And so we started in Kingston with Folda. That was our first away trip, so to speak, our first sleepaway camp. And what we had done was started with doing one-on-one in-person experiences. So on the next slide, Janelle, it's a little bit of how we set up the room. So it's a dark photo. You're in pretty much darkness, and this is a one-on-one experience, okay? Which meant I was performing the show 6 times a day. That's a lot. Approximately 1 hour. A person signs up for the 1 hour experience. It's a dialogue. They come into the space and they meet me. I introduce myself. I ask them their name. And then I start with my land acknowledgement, which is when I was in Kingston, I would recognize the lands that I was on there and then share that I was visiting from the unceded territories that I live in Vancouver, Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh, which you heard Janelle share at the top. But my addition to my land acknowledgement was a piece of information that I had learned from Indigenous folks here and continue to learn. Actually, I was just at a conference not so long ago called the Indigenous Disability and Wellness Gathering, which was in recognition of November being Indigenous Disability Awareness Month, and we're still in November, which talks about the unique barriers that Indigenous peoples with disabilities face in Canada, and I suppose outside of Canada, but specifically in Canada, and gathered this group of people together. And one of the things that gets talked about a lot in that space, and I had learned previously, was that in many traditional cultural languages, Indigenous languages, there's no translation for the word disability. It didn't exist. It wasn't, it's not a word that you can translate. Like the word disability is colonial language. And so a lot of folks in Indigenous communities are like, so what do we do with the word disability? What does that actually mean? And in traditional languages, for me, what I've been taught, what it feels like is that Indigenous communities didn't look at disability as something that was bad. We weren't broken, we weren't damaged. They recognized that everybody in a community had value. We all brought strengths. We all needed to be taken care of and nurtured, because the aging process is just that, you know. They recognize that we all may experience illness or injury in our lifetime, and that every person in a community has value. And so I share that as part of my land acknowledgement, because I also think that if colonizers had respected that kind of philosophy around the human existence, that myself and many people in the disability community today would have a much different experience in this world than we do now. Because as you know, there's a lot of stigma around disability, there's a lot of mistreatment, there's a lot of inequities, there's a lot of rights that still need to be fought around disability justice. And if we lived in a world where people were like, yeah, you know what, we take care of our community. It could be me one day, it could be anybody in my family, and we all have a place and we all contribute. What a beautiful thing that would be if we lived in communities that took care of each other. So that's always part of my land acknowledgement when I do this particular show, because it feels important to me as part of accessibility and the disability experience. So in this particular part of the show, I call this the portrait show part. This is when folks come in. We've done the land acknowledgement. We're just getting to know each other. I invite them in and I offer them a cup of tea. And I bring these teas from Vancouver. I describe to them the type of tea that I have. And I ask them to choose a cup. There's 4 cups on a table, and I ask them to describe to me which cup they'd like to use. And then I know what order the cups are in. I pick the cup and I use a liquid level, which sits at the edge of the cup. And when I pour the water in, it beeps so that I know that the water is not going to go over. And I don't say anything about it. It's a part of accessibility through osmosis, right? So, and then I hand them their cup of tea. If they ask me something about it, I'll address it. But otherwise, I don't. It's just a part of my life. I don't have to explain everything that I do, right? Just like when I walk into the set, I have my white cane and I hang it up. If they ask me about it, I'll address it. If not, it's just a part of my life. Um, I sit in my chair. I invite them to sit in their chair and enjoy their cup of tea or water, whatever they'd like to have. And we start with introductions around image descriptions. I describe what I look. I ask them to describe what they look like. And I ask them if I can take a portrait of them. And portraiture is not my photography practice. There's no finding the light in portraiture. I can't see people's faces. But what I'm saying to them as I describe my finding the light practice is that I'm listening for moments because we're about to have a dialogue. And as we have our dialogue and they describe to me the photographs, I'm going to be asking them questions. And they don't necessarily know where this is going, but I know where this is going to go. And if they're okay with me taking photographs of them. Okay, so here we are. There's a screen, there's actually 4 screens. So they're surrounded by projection screens that are about 10 feet tall and maybe 12 or 15 feet wide. So they're really surrounded by projection, and different images will come up on different parts of the screen at different times. Of course, I know where they're going to come up at different times. And we start with one photo where I explain the practice of finding the light, and I ask them to describe to me the photo purely objectively, right? So what's in it? Trees, rocks, whatever, objectively. Then I bring up 6 photos and I ask them to choose a photo. And I ask them to describe it, why they chose it. And then we get into the difference in ways of describing. Because for me, it's not about what's in the photo. It's about what I felt when I was taking the photo. So I might ask them, for example, with the alleyway, what do you hear around you? That's not in the photo. What's the weather like? What does the sun feel like on your skin? What do you smell? So not only am I getting them to describe to me the things that are in the photo that they see, but what the environment is like. Do they feel scared? Do they feel safe? Does this place feel like some place they've ever been before in their lives? Those kinds of things give me a little bit of insight into who they are. So Janelle, I'll get you to bring up the next slide. So this is where we talk about the description is built in and why. Obviously for my access need, it's built in, but this is also how I get to know them. And remember I said to you that I'm listening for moments. So if they're going to describe, I think I have included on the far left and the far right 2 images of nature. And so again, think about me asking folks, what do you hear? What do you smell? What does the weather feel like? What time of year is it? Who's around you? So they may say there are birds chirping. It's a crisp fall day, but the sun's shining on my skin. I can hear the trees, the leaves blowing, and the smell of pine. And there's a trickle of a creek off to the side. It reminds me of when my father used to take us on hiking trips when we were a kid. And this one time, this one time, my brother got lost, but he didn't really get lost. He was playing hide and seek, right? Like they go on and they tell these stories. And you know how you can hear in somebody's voice, you know, when they're sharing something that's good, a good memory or a scary memory, or you can hear how people are feeling, and those are the moments I'm capturing. So I click my camera when I hear these moments. So I'm finding the moments. And we go through a couple of different photos, and every time I'm asking them to choose a photo, and we build and we build and we build on that experience as we describe. So I want to play with you just a little clip. So the next slide I have says Georgina on it. And this slide, Janelle, will take us to the video. So if you want to pull up the video, this was a video that we recorded of Georgina doing the Through My Lens experience. And we're going to start it kind of at the beginning, but after the tea and all that stuff. But with the first photo around the 14-minute mark, so it's interrupting our conversation. But I just want you to listen for a little bit and get the feel of the relationship that we're building. So go ahead and hit play, Janelle. Surfaces, where the light is, what the shadow's doing, and those things kind of all make sense to me, kind of a weird way. Now Nico, our friend Nico, is going to bring up one of my photos. And I've had this photo described to me a couple of times. Every time it's very different, but I want to tell you what I get told is in this photo objectively. Rocks and trees, rocks and trees. But what would help me today is if you would tell me what your perspective is of this photo. And there's no right or wrong answer. You can ask me questions at any time. But if you can just, Georgina, just pull out things that you see and give them a name. Tell me what you see.
So can I ask, is this in Vancouver?
I don't know. Do you think it's in Vancouver?
I don't know.
It's in Vancouver. Yeah, it is in Vancouver.
I wasn't sure. I used to live in Vancouver. But
Okay.
I was just wondering if I've seen this location.
Okay.
So when I see this right away, my first instinct is to say Indinwe Maganado.
Okay.
So Indinwe Maganado says what it means all my relations or all my relatives.
I was taught this gesture of the hands for all my relations. Is that what we're talking about?
So it's like for me, the trees, the trees, the ground, Mother Earth, like these are our relations. In order for us to maintain balance in life, we have to honor. We have to live in a respectful way. So when I look at these trees, these tall trees, whether they are big, wide trunks or very skinny trunks, it's the difference that embodies who people are. Because we're not the same size, right? And neither is our skin. And so if you look at the bark of a tree, the texture, the feel of it, the smell of it is different because it's part of the distinction of their unique species. And I really love about that the same thing, whether or not it's pine needles or if it's leaves or if there's acorns that are on it. When I see this, I do see a barrier, which is a metal steel fence.
Okay.
Looks like about maybe 4 feet high, like a standard chain link fence. So that's the barrier. So either to protect the ancestors that are the root ones and the ground that's there, the essence, or it's important because on the other side where it looks like there's some buildings with some roofs, that maybe the folks that hang out in that space for whatever reason, it's to keep them, to admire it from a distance, but not to necessarily enter in to disrupt or to disturb the essence of the forest. You can stop it now, Janelle. So you get kind of an idea of Georgina's perspective. Everybody who describes this photo sees something different, feels something different, has a different perspective. So there are no two people who ever describe a photo, obviously, the same way, which is beautiful, beautiful for me, because it's kind of, it's a bit like a crowdsourced description. I get so many different perspectives that it just adds so many layers for me as to what is in a photograph, what a photograph means. If we use the analogy that a picture says 1,000 words, if I collect all of the words from all of the people that have described this photo just in the time that we were in Kingston, so there were, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 people that did this experience. I for all the photos they described, it was so enriching for me to be able to experience that. So that's just the top of the show. There's other photos that get described, which is very, very cool. So we go through the show, and when we get to the kind of the end of the middle end to the show, Janelle, I'm going to get you to go back to slide number 5. This one's the Through My Lens, the experience. There's this red globe.
and I ask people to describe this. Now, this is the full picture of it, but we bring it up in stages, so little pieces of it at a time, and I ask them to describe it. Now, some of you who have the privilege of sight may be able to tell that this is a picture of the inside of an eyeball. It's my eyeball, and what looks like rivers is broken blood vessels. This is the damage that caused my blindness. So I talk a little bit about, without getting deep into the weeds of the science, but I get people to describe the photo of the medical photos of the inside of my eyes. But we do it in such a way where they can't figure out exactly what they're looking at. So we zoom in really tightly, and then we zoom out a little bit and zoom out a little more and zoom out a little more, right? So they really can't get it, then maybe they could. And then maybe they should, if they, at the very least, they should probably figure out it's a medical photo. And then I sort of tell a little bit about the story of how I lost my sight. And of course, there's a kind of a comical punchline at the end, because statistically, I lost my sight in both eyes. And there was a less than 1% chance in both eyes. And of course, statistically, that's like almost impossible. So I should have bought a lottery ticket, right? Bad luck is still luck. So there's a whole section just on that. And then there's a section on my childhood home. And we talk about childhood memories and what happens inside the home. What was their childhood like, right? I'm building all of this information about this individual person that I'm spending time with. But there's all a purpose for this. So after the Georgina slide, we're going to slide 9. And that's because when I get the person to the very end of the show, we're sitting across from each other, and I ask them if they want me to bring up, well, I don't ask them. I say, I'd like to share with you the portrait that I took. And on that next slide there, please, Janelle, I show them the unfiltered portrait first. On this side, it's the right side. That's James, the co-writer and director. I didn't take this photo. This is for a paper we're writing actually on the work. So this is a professional photo of James that was taken by Nico, who is also a photographer, and he's the person who's running the slides in the background. So Nico and I sat down. This is also part of the show when I explained to them how this works. But Nico and I sat down and I tried to explain to him how I see, what my perception of sight is. And it's not a perfect creation of this filter is not a perfect representation of what I see, because there is no such thing of being able to do that. But we have a conversation about sort of how much of the face I see, and you know, what pieces of it are missing and what's harder to see than others. And so sometimes, you know, if somebody has blue hair, that will be my exact, you know, my icon for them. And if they show up tomorrow without blue hair, I don't know who they are, right? And so he tried to create this filter to represent that. So it's a bit of Nico's artistic creation and a bit of my perception of sight and how I see the world. And usually the picture that I've taken, the portrait, is a candid moment of somebody. It's totally not professional looking. It catches you in this moment where you got like a weird grin on your face, or something, you know, that looks like you're contemplating something, or, you know, you've got some sort of awkward face, but it's a moment, and it's awesome to just see a moment that you're not expecting the camera to be taking. And I ask them how it makes them feel. What do they see, and how does it make them feel? And usually you get that whole, I don't like the way I look, blah, 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 blah. Every once in a while you're like, oh, that's, yeah, I can see my smile, and blah, 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 blah. Then I bring up the photo with the filter, and I say to them, this is what my eye sees. What do you see, and how does it make you feel? And a lot of times I get, oh, it makes me feel sad. Or sometimes I get, oh, that's quite interesting. Sometimes I get, that's really beautiful, actually. And my response to anything they give me is not to correct what they say, is to offer back what I get from this photo. Because remember, it's not about what I see in the photo, it's what I get from the environment that I've been in where I've taken the photo, which is all of the things that I've learned from them in the conversation. Now, obviously, I don't spend the hour sharing all of the things that I've learned, but highlights. And they may not be the best things about a person. I may say to them that, you know, I've learned that, for example, Georgina is a person who is very connected to nature. Or I may share with them about the example I gave you in the beginning about the father that took his kids camping. You know, a pair of siblings that were a little bit mischievous, but loved camping, loved spending time in the woods. Maybe, you know, we had a great participant who said he, you know, grew up in a cabin, isolated, and now doesn't talk to any of his siblings, you know, but, you know, loved his siblings when he grew up, now doesn't have a relationship with any of them. So, you know, sometimes people have precarious relationships with their families and aren't connected with them anymore. So this is about connection with humans. It's about a different perspective of the world. This is not about blindness. This is just about connecting with people and about perspective, but we're doing it through my lens. And that's the interesting part for me about this project. I could talk about this project forever, but I wanted to share with you how we integrated the description into that. We invited blind people, of course, that's my community, to share in this work. And if I know I have blind people in, I do extra integrated description, like welcome to our space, where you're surrounded by 4 projections in the space and blah, 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 so that they get a better understanding of the space. We do a touch tour beforehand because I'm always in the space. I don't, you know, walk in and be like, hi. In fact, I sit in the audience without my white cane, so people don't even know that I'm there. And then the lights go dark and they hear the tapping of my cane in the dark until I, you know, so I'm sitting amongst them. And they, if we do it in an audience setting, if we do it on a 101, it's different. But if we do it in an audience setting, I do a Q&A with the audience, like Simon says, and I whittle people down to the one person that's going to do the experience, and I bring them up on the stage and we do it in front of an audience. And I do that by asking them questions like, if you're somebody who thinks about the world in details, stay standing. If you're more of a big picture thinker, sit down. And we just whittle the group down, right? And if we're down to the final 5, I might say, are you a cats person or a dogs person, and tell me why. And that person gets 30 seconds to, you know, defend. And that's how I figure out what kind of conversationalist they are. And then if we get down to the final 3, then I do the arbitrary, you know, does your phone number end in an even number or an odd number, right? And then we get our one participant, and they come up and they do things in front of everybody. There's a little audience participation. I take a group photo so that the audience gets a filtered photo of themselves, and everybody in the audience is welcome to that photo. At the end of the show, it's their photo, and my guest is welcome to a copy of, in this case, James's photo on the left, which is his filtered photo. So there's a printout. I give it to him. It's his gift for joining me in the space. And I always say to the guests that I hope that it sparks conversation about the experience and continues the conversation. So that's a little bit about Through My Lens. I know we only had an hour and I went through it pretty fast, but we have some time for some questions if people want to learn more or have any questions that they'd like to ask me, because I think the last slide is just questions. So that's a little bit about the project.
I've gone ahead and stopped sharing so that it's easier for us to have a convo. And yeah, we have 15 minutes. So any questions or comments for Amy? It's a bit of a snowy day here in Winnipeg, so I think we're all a little slow. Yes.
That's okay.
But thank you for that presentation. It was really lovely. It was so interesting just to, I don't know, I haven't heard of a project like this where it's just so like really immersive and really very one-on-one. And I think it really explores how we should be doing image descriptions. And I love always working with you because you always say, don't be so objective. We want to feel it too. Yeah. And so make those descriptions subjective. And that's something that I try to share with folks as well. And while it makes it more difficult to create image descriptions, it makes it so that it's something that's actually of use to you and kind of recreates the experience.
Yeah, it contextualizes things. And of course, because this is my show and the things that I like, I get to do whatever I want, right? and that's the fun of it for me. I wouldn't say that you have to go to extreme lengths to do a whole bunch of subjectivity in all of your image descriptions, but contextualize them. That's kind of a bugaboo for me when I read an image description and it's really just in the left and in the right and in the back and in the in the foreground, and it's like, just tell me it's a Thanksgiving dinner table, like, right? Or a dinner table with people at it. I don't need to know all the things on the table. Like, I trust you to tell me it's a dinner table, right? So there are some things that I trust my describer or the person who's being my eyes to just sum it up of what it is. Or yeah. So
Great.
yeah.
Sean, I see you got your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think this is really wonderful. And the thing that one of the things I really find amazing about it is how, like, it actually redefines what art is in a way. It 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 takes that part that we often overlook as being just like an invisible side effect, which is the effect inside of each person who engages with it, and it turns it into the main event. Like, it's the art is the catalyst.
Yeah.
Art is the beginning of a conversation. The art is connection between people. It becomes a verb. And that's what I think is really exciting about it, and that it takes it from just being an object. Like, we like, I have this saying that I keep coming back to it. It's like, we've been mired in nouns for so long, in things and objects. And it's like to create and to make it like connections between people and their feelings and their thoughts. I think it's just really taking, strangely enough, like, art to another level in a way. So I really appreciate that, and I think it's so exciting and brilliant. Thank you for this. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Sean. We have a website that's just sort of in its beginning stages, that we'll start to add like some of my photographs and things. It's really at the moment one of those things that you send to festivals that you apply to, right, as like promo stuff, as will this video be, which is why we don't publicly share it, because we want it to be as part of a promo package, I guess they call it. See, I'm so new to some of this art world stuff. I'm learning. The throughmylens.ca is the website address, and so there's some other photos there, but there's a couple of interesting testimonials there of people who did the one-on-one that are what their experience was like, and it felt really important to me to ask people what that was like for them, because the difference for me was, and what was interesting about that little clip I shared with you about Georgina, is that Georgina was actually being live streamed. So she was being live streamed to another room in the same building to a live audience, but also online to ticket holders wherever in the world they were joining in from. And so after that, we went into that room, the other room where there were like 50 or 60 people watching the live screen on a live stream on a big screen, and Georgina and I did a Q&A with this audience. And in that video, that 1 hour video-ish, 1 hour-ish, we went a little over time. We're both chattery people, but Georgina and I laughed together. We cried together. We talked about decolonization and colonization together. We talked about barriers that each other faced. We had all of these moments together that, as two strangers, we would have never had together. We just wouldn't have. There wouldn't have been a time and a place where two strangers would have said, hey, like, what happens in your world, right? And then the audience, the live audience asking these questions were, I mean, in sitting in front of having a Q&A, the two of us were in tears, because we were like, really? Like, you got, like, I was like, you got that much out of this? Like, really? Okay, it's not hard for me to believe. But then there were a couple of folks that did the one-on-one on their own, and the difference in the vulnerability between the one-on-ones and the in-person and the audience. Sorry, this is gonna, when people did the one-on-one experience with just me in the room, And when we did it in small audiences where I took somebody from an audience and brought them in, I was like, oh, those people aren't going to want to be vulnerable in front of other people watching them live because they're going to be aware an audience is watching them. It actually didn't make that much of a difference, because once you're in that sort of bubble, that little screen bubble, you kind of forget those people are there. And you're just in that moment. It's just the two of us in that moment. And I don't know how that works, but for whatever reason, after the experience is over, people would come up to me afterwards, some people that did the experience and other people who watched it, and would just say to me that they felt like we had created a really safe space to be able to share. And that really made me feel good as an artist. Because that was one of my biggest concerns, was that I was going to push too hard or not hard enough, because I cannot see how people are reacting to the things I'm asking them. So I don't know if I ask a question, if they're giving me a look like, oh, why is she asking this? Or I don't want to answer this, or what's in a pause? Because there could be so much in somebody's body language about what's in a pause. And I have no idea what that pause means. Right? Do I jump in and say something? Do I not say something? How do I read this moment? And so there's a lot of cues for me to read that I don't know how to read. And so it's one of my biggest fears and worries is bringing in harm unnecessarily. Yeah. Thanks for your thoughts.
Great. And we have one last question in the chat here from Camille Zoe, who says, I think audience participation is such a great way to engage the public through this process. Is it always explained beforehand so that people know what to expect when attending?
Absolutely. Everything's done with audience consent. So from the very top of the show, if we have an audience in the room, even when we don't, if it's one person, it's all done with consent. Like I don't take portraits without asking them. When they buy their ticket, it is part of the statement when they buy their ticket that are you okay to have your portrait taken? But in case they missed it, I ask it anyways. But when we do the group shot, what I say to them is that I'm experimenting in portraiture. It's not a medium that I know very well. If they're comfortable taking a portrait, having me take a portrait of them as a group, that would be lovely. If they are not, they are welcome to leave the room or like pull their hat down over their face or obscure their face or whatever. But basically I say, I promise, your face won't be shown anyways. So you don't really have to worry about it, but they don't know that it's going to be filtered. Right. But at the end of the day, their faces aren't able to be seen. But what's interesting is when we bring up that filtered photo, because they get to see the raw photo of them as a group sitting in their chairs, and then they see the filtered photo, and I ask the group, can you see where you're sitting? Can you make out bits of yourself? Those kinds of things. And it's really interesting to see how they react to that. And then they're also offered a copy of it. So if they want a digital copy emailed to them, just leave us your email address. And there are people from this project that I've done that I'm still in touch with today. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
I
hope to be able to bring it to Winnipeg, and I'm hoping in 2026 to be able to bring it to the UK.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, let us know when you come to Winnipeg.
Of course.
We'd love to support you in any way we can.
Yeah, of course.
Well, is there any last minute burning questions or comments that folks have? Give a slow pause. Okay, forever hold your I can't remember how it goes. Anyways, Amy, thank you so much. This was really interesting work, and so happy to have you share. Yeah, we can't wait to see what you do next.
That's great. I really appreciate you all spending some time on a Sunday afternoon with me.
Well, technically,
it's snowy. It's snowy.
It's snowy Thursday afternoon.
Snowy Thursday. I meant to say, this is like my dyslexic ADHD brain that meant to say snowy, and I said Sunday.
It's all good. I think we're all in the same boat. We're all slow today. Okay, everyone, have a great day. Safe travel. Stay warm, and we'll see you all again soon.